Welcome to our last video of 2024, the brand new Nissan Murano, ironically. In this video, we're going to talk about the changes made to this, the engineering that went into it, and what it's like to drive. But in the final thoughts, I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to cover the pros and cons of this vehicle, but the pros and cons of all the things that I've seen in 2024, working in media, and of course on the brand side. And what I believe that we need to be doing in 2025 in our small space to try to improve on this and make things better. So let's get started. The brand new 2025 Nissan Murano. I'm at the launch event in Tennessee. As a Murano Cross Cabriolet owner, I can tell you I'm used to luxury, and that's something that they wanted to put forward into this design. Also, reductive styling. The last generation was a mishmash of styling cues and shapes everywhere. This is a back to basics approach on the outside and inside. Let's start with pricing. There's 3 trim levels, the SV, SL, and Platinum. And to be completely honest, you're gonna pay about $45 for the mid-trim to get the panoramic roof, the Bose audio, and some of the niceties that you want. But they did package a few things in the lower trim that you're gonna like. The big screen with the hat on top of the screen so it doesn't look like it's just stuck on the dashboard. Outside, clearly they're very proud of this design. It's very sleek, and the only thing I can compare it to is the Crown Signia, which we really liked because it's a very back to basics type hatchback CUV thing. They did benchmark this against the Passport, the old Passport, which has now gone boxy in the new iteration, and the Blazer. I don't see those being as apples to apples anymore. Compared to the Crown Signia, I think what they're trying to do here is they're packing in more features. There's more tech in here. There's a better use of technology for the 360 camera system, and it feels far more modern than the Toyota without being overly complicated. So they're very, very similar in their design philosophy. However, exterior styling is very subjective. They tried to slim down the headlight design on this and integrate some LED lighting in the bumper. They moved the license plate to the lower part of the rear bumper. And just overall, it's very cohesive while still having a bulbous, more athletic stance, much like my Cross Cabriolet was. But let's talk about the interior space. They have gone to 2-tone interiors. They've also done this 2-tone thing where you have a black roof, but the interior, like obviously I'm in the, the doldrum black and silver interior, but they do have kind of this blue. They have a tan and black. So you can spice this up quite a bit, and that's something that the Toyota variant does not do at all. So if you want more character, this has it. They've also added this kind of fake looking glass piece on the dashboard that they're saying is like Italian glass because Murano has connections to Italy. I'm not even going to go there. Needless to say, it's a design exercise, and I think it works well with the aesthetic of what they're trying to do with this interior. Again, it's reductive, it's very clean, it's very modern, and almost everything works well. They've done physical controls, much like all the new Nissans. They haven't screwed that up. A lot of brands keep fucking it up. They keep trying to overdo it with touch, and they're cumbersome to use. You still have physical door handles. Everything you want to interact with is very basic. Now, they did do capacitive touch for the lower half of the HVAC controls, which again is about this reductive look, although, you know, you could argue that most of your functions are here and easily accessible without using the touchscreen. The new infotainment is Android Automotive, and it is very quick. The wireless function for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are great. It is persistent, so when you turn off the car, it doesn't kill the infotainment like in the Acura version, so you can turn it off and on and it's still paired up. And most of the functionality is good. They're harping on all of their 360 camera technology, which is a big push because a lot of the other Japanese brands are way behind on this. The only thing you can compare this to is the Koreans with the Hyundais. They do a great job with their 360, but this is taking it to another level. If you can't see outside your car and you're really phobic of parking and don't know where you're at, this solves all your problems. It's really good, assuming your cameras aren't blocked full of dirt or snow. So when you go up the trim levels, you get massaging seats, which are very, very average on the top trim. I would say that it's not necessary to have. You have heated and cooled seats when you move up, and even heated seats in the back. And then you have a rear window shade, which is an automatic. You just have to pull it up. Hatch space is enormous. It's exactly what you expect for a CUV. You're going to fit almost everything you need in there. And the way that the seats fold down, everything's really accessible and usable as a functional vehicle. And there's a ton of space in the back seat for large passengers. And again, Nissan does a great job on seats. When you go in the upper trim level where you get the semi-aniline leather with the kind of two-tone and quilted leather, it looks great and they feel so supple. If you're somebody like me who has a ton of ass problems, you're going to go on a long trip and feel, well, you're not going to have to take as many anti-inflammatories to keep the inflammation down. Now, before I take the new Murano for a drive, I wanted to talk about some of the engineering, and you're probably already thinking, well, what actually went into this? And to be honest, when I went into this program, they kind of jammed the Murano into half of a day. So I drove it, I watched the presentation, and I just thought, well, here's just another cookie cutter SUV. They're doing the same thing everybody else is doing. And it wasn't until I was ready to walk out the door to catch an airplane back that I ran into the engineers. And I ran into the chief engineer, and I didn't even know that's who it was. So we had a short conversation, and it wasn't until I got back home a week later that I did a call with them to understand all the work that went into this. So the development for this vehicle was led by their US team of engineers in Arizona and Michigan, and they spent the better half of 5 years working on it. And they had a goal of making it more quiet, comfortable, more luxurious, and less vibration prone than the previous Murano. In fact, they wanted to kind of go into the luxury car segment in some of these areas. So they benchmarked things like the Crown Signia, the Passport, and even kind of got into the Lexus area of vehicle dynamics. So every brand is going to talk about how their car is better, more comfortable. But when you get into the engineering, that's where it's a little bit more interesting here. So they took a brand new body in white, brand new platform for the new Murano. It's not shared with the old one. The platform is used on the Pathfinder, however, it is heavily modified. There are some carryover components here, and this is just typical to save cost. So the subframes in the front and the back are carryover from the old Murano and some components from the Pathfinder. But what they did here is they had to make massive changes to global and local stiffnesses of the body. And that was to reduce low frequency vibration and noise and high frequency noise, which is more wind noise or air noise. So they started attacking the body in white through computer simulation or CAE. And as they developed this, they found multiple key areas that they had to reinforce, starting with the front, radiator supports, strut supports, and load path supports up through the windshield and roof line. And then they attack the boominess, that frequency, that low frequency noise that comes from the structure, where they've had to reduce twisting and bending and improve global stiffnesses of the body to reduce that booming noise that you get from the back half of the car. So the ring structure was changed. Some of the side sill structure was changed. They've also done simulation data that has shown kind of an improvement through the roofline all the way through the floor through structural reinforcements similar to what they did in the Rogue. By improving that, they reduced that low frequency booming. Then they started attacking kind of that airborne noise by using insulated glass or acoustic laminated glass, ANC through the Bose system, which is active noise cancellation to get rid of unwanted frequencies, and then doing the common sense stuff. They literally covered the entire floor of the vehicle with foam insulation, which you can see in some of these diagrams. So there's a lot more that goes into that, of course, but a lot of it starts with the body structure. Believe it or not, the more rigid you make the body and you improve some of these areas, the lower you can, or the more you can control certain unwanted frequencies. Now, the last thing to talk about before I take this for a drive is some of the ride and handling changes they've made. Starting with suspension. They have switched over to a KYB shock absorber, which is called their Harmo Freak damper, which to me really seems like a dual flow damper that can open up a separate oil path through valving when it hits a certain bump or like a pothole. It opens up that oil flow path to give this a wider range of adjustment without going to adaptive dampers. And the side effect is a much smoother ride and better body control because it has kind of that dual purpose action. The other thing is they've moved over to the Bridgestone Alenza tire, which met their targets for lower NVH, better ride and handling, and greater comfort. And that's one of those things when you have all these things, if you don't have a tire that interacts well with the suspension and some of the body structure and reducing NVH, you can throw all that away. So this new Alenza that they put on the tire, this car is also wider, so it gives you just more grip levels overall, but it is super quiet, and you notice zero tire noise from this thing. Other things like trying to remove vibration from the steering wheel. They did have a frequency isolator in there before, although just an add-on module. Now they've turned the entire airbag module into a frequency damper, 360. So it's easier to control those unwanted vibrations through the steering wheel. They've switched out to an EPS rack from their old hydraulic unit. And a lot of the EPS changes, yes, it does help to isolate a bit more, but it's also because of their new safety suite, which requires steering intervention and some of these advanced controls that they need for, crash mitigation and all that and steering. So EPS is there. Last but not least, to tie this all together, is the seats. And while this may seem almost laughable, some deficiencies in the body that they can't address, or certain vibrations, or like harshness, you can take that edge off with the seat, or namely the foams. So this is something they're constantly iterating through simulation, and they call it their zero-gravity NASA-inspired seat. Throw out some of the marketing. What that means is they're trying to find a seat that you can put in a car with as minimal amount of pressure points as possible. And this is something that they've taken seriously and gone to the supply chain level and looked at their production seats and compared it to their simulation or CAE data to try to get as little deviation as possible from their original designs to make sure they're all good. They're also pulling in Nissans from 3 or 4 years ago that have a lot of miles on them to take their seats apart to find out where their foams have degraded, to improve the foam design so the seats hold up better. So this is very important to them. And again, it can help with NVH. It can help make the car drive better and feel better just from the perception of the seat being so comfortable. So again, these are all the things they're trying to tie together, and it is a lot, and it adds up to a lot, and I hope when I go and take this for a drive that it really does make a difference. All right, I like the interior, I like the exterior, but more importantly, how does this thing drive? I'm gonna launch this with traction, stability, all the systems on in standard mode. All right, so we have the variable compression 2-liter turbocharged 4-popper here with a torque converted automatic, no more CVT. So that's going to be our first discussion. And you would think this is going to be an amazing change because everybody bemoans the CVT in every Nissan, and now they're fixing it. So how does it drive? Well, power-wise, when you're foot to the floor, it's got a lot of thrust. You feel a ton of torque. But unfortunately, and this is where I'm really surprised by this is a very surgy driving experience. In throttle tip-in, there is so much head jerk. There's this multi-non-linear steps to when the transmission actually responds. Throttle calibration, you have to get halfway down the pedal before you get any type of response from it. And then when the engine spins up and then the actual boost kicks in from the turbo, or when they allow the power to cycle through, it's like nothing, a little bit, then a lot of it, and it's just so intermittent the way that the performance is and the way that it delivers it. And clearly you're not buying this to go foot to the floor, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's the fine like throttle tip-in motions that you make to get the car to accelerate, because it's always in the highest gear for efficiency. So it's constantly having to do a multi-step process to get the car to go. And sometimes it's very surgy. It's rare that it's smooth to accelerate. And when it does, it's honestly, from trans tuning to throttle calibration and engine performance, that's probably the worst part about this driving experience. It's definitely not great. When you're in manual mode, you can mitigate some of that, but nobody's driving with the paddles on a car like this. I feel like it's smoother when you have control of the transmission, which is where you really notice that the trans logic in this needs work, namely on uphills when you're trying to get this thing going, because it's so dead in the higher gears. I don't know if this is the right engine for a car like this, but it definitely needs work. Let's just forget about that for a moment and talk about what this thing does good. It is very, very quiet. It is ultra refined. I would say, you know, when you're talking about the Crown Signia, that was a very refined, quiet ride. I feel most of the time the body control and the damping in this car there's less head toss. It's more confidence inspiring in terms of feeling like you can lean on it more while being a great luxury car experience. But I think they did a really good job with making this smooth. The ride height is really good. The visibility seems better, even though there's not a lot of glass in here. It's a bright area experience, namely with the panoramic, and it's a joy to drive in a straight line and even some corners. Again, refinement, body control, all of that is good, and it feels like you can really toss this thing around. And combined with the seats, because there's so much give in the seats, you have really good damping, but the seats take off that extra 5%. You can tell this is a much more rigid body than the previous Murano that it replaces. But here's, again, we're going to go into some of the negatives. When you get this thing going and you really start to push it, you feel where the drivetrain again starts to let it down, because you always feel the front wheel drive part. It's very pushy, and there's a lot of torque steer depending on your situation. So if you just hit the boost just right, you feel the tugging on the steering wheel before it evens out or neutralizes the power being sent to the rear for the all-wheel drive system. There's always this like delay in that system. And also, even with all the stability on, if you're remotely turning, you have any type of turning going on, like pulling out somewhere, it constantly wants to one wheel peel. Even with the stability and traction on it, it's constantly spinning an inside tire. So again, it goes back to great ride refinement, super quiet, very, very comfortable audio system. I was surprised at the Bose calibration in here, but just audibly without testing it, I think you can tweak this the way you like, combined with the noise cancellation in it and the straight line driving comfort and ride quality. I really appreciate this car, but you have to compare it to the Crown Signia for the price. And I feel like the hybrid system in that car is far more linear, more transparent. It does what you want it to do. It's less surgy, but I'm gonna leave it at that. We're gonna get into the final thoughts and sum all of this up. Final thoughts on the Nissan Murano in 2024. What the engineers wanted to do here was to make this feel far more comfortable, more isolated, by improving not just Band-Aid fixes, but improving body structure. And like I talked about on the engineering side, it's clear the use of those updates of making this vehicle more rigid, the isolation techniques they've used, reducing those frequencies or unwanted frequencies made a massive difference in this driving character. Along with the dampers and the tires, it's such a cruiser, and it's not a total boat either. You're not just flopping your head around. Sometimes brands will just make it super soft and make you feel isolated that way. You don't feel nauseous driving this. It has a lot more room than the Crown Signia when you really look at it. It's a very usable vehicle, and it's not offensive to the eyes. While it is definitely more modern looking, it's not overstyled, and I think a lot of people are gonna like that. My only concern is I feel like they need to do a lot more work on the drivetrain tuning, namely on the transmission and the engine power delivery. It's just, again, it's non-linear. I beat that to death in the drive. I think that's something they can improve over time, but it's far worse than what the old V6 was in terms of just smooth sailing. It lacks that, and you still have the four-cylinder noise there to contend with. So again, great in many cases, but again, there's always something to work on, and that's it. So this leads me to my last discussion. This event I went to, I didn't really have high expectations. I just went because I'm like, I want to learn about some new Nissan stuff. And I do believe, as much as people constantly talk about how they're going to go under, how they're failing, blah, 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 every brand is going to have struggles in 2025. Every brand has way too many vehicles to support. And in the case of Nissan, you can tell, like, these engineers have to basically redevelop a car every 2 or 3 years. And it's one thing now with simulation to get these cars off the ground. It's another thing to actually get them in production, depending on the brand. And it's something we're seeing with almost every single company trying to struggle with to keep up the rapid pace of change. So I wish them the best, and their engineers. Thank you very much for talking to me and explaining your side and what you did and all the work that went into it. It's no joke. Almost every single brand has this group of engineers that has these impossible tasks to try to keep up with a massive list of cars that they need to make better and better while everybody else is doing the same. I would not want to be in that position, but I kind of am on the other side, on the media space. So here's the problems that I've seen. I think you're starting to see a consolidation or a shrinkage of media. There's too much covering everything. Everybody wants their views, everybody wants their clicks, everybody wants to be seen. The problem with that is when you go to some of these brands to learn about them, and we're not getting paid by these brands to learn about any of this. We're not getting paid by anybody. We're supported by the people that view these videos, our Patreons, some of our sponsors for certain videos, and of course ad revenue from YouTube. So this is how we do what we do. But the problem has become that so many people are just doing the bare minimum, like just trying to get stuff out as quickly as possible in order to get those quick views, that when we go to these brands for information, and the Nissan one's a good example, they're not the only one that does this. You go, you watch a presentation, and it's literally just marketing stuff that every other brand is doing. You could copy and paste 10 brands of the same type of vehicle. It's the same identical thing. You have engineers sitting in the background or not there, and what it does is it's watering everything down to the lowest common denominator, and nobody's getting to learn how things work and the difficulty. And I think if more people understood that, not just internally marketing PR, you'd have a better appreciation of all the work that goes into this, and also maybe having a better idea of where the work doesn't need to go and where you can kind of improve things and streamline things. So in 2025, we really hope to be a part of that solution. Again, that tiny part that we can contribute to is where we're going to try to work on this. And also with the brands, I hope that they continue to push and allow us to understand what they're trying to do and explain it, and let the viewers decide at the end of the day, is this right or wrong, and do they want to be a part of it? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.